The aim, let's say, of this meeting is to start a fruitful collaboration to serve Africa. Above all, to serve Africa. You know that today, Africa faces a multitude of crises, you name it, financial, climate, food systems, energy, you name it. This multitude of crises, at the end of the day, for us Africans, should be processed as opportunities. We have no alternative to process this crisis in a different way. These are opportunities. And this is the reason that I came here to ask for support from the Pan-African Parliament, from the President of the Pan-African Parliament and the Bureau, around three important narratives. The first one is financing for development. Africa reached a level that to change the paradigm of financing for development is no longer an option. It became an imperative. We need to change the paradigm. What does that mean? It's very simple. As we speak, Africa already finances its own development, meaning that we need to give a primacy role from a financing for development standpoint to domestic resource mobilization. It's the only way for Africa to gain policy space and to be in a better position to control its economic and financial flows. And we need to do that because on an annual basis, Africa loses approximately $300 billion. The second item that I brought to this conversation was the energy climate dynamics, let's say it this way. Everybody knows that as we speak, there are 600 million people in Africa without electricity, and Africa needs to create on an annual basis 18 million jobs. Everybody knows that Africa is a dark continent. But at the same time, Africa has all energy sources. You name it, we have. You name it, we have. So this is a paradox. How come Africa has all the energy sources and at the same time is a dark continent? This means that we reach a level that each African country is entitled to undertake its own energy planning, define its own energy mix to address not only development challenges, at the same time be in the right track to contribute to a green world. Third issue that I mentioned was the nexus, peace, security, and development. We all know that in the past 4 or 5 years, unfortunately, instability has increased. We start being exposed to different forms of instability. Terrorism, non-state actors, Sahel region, the northern part of Mozambique, you name it. We need, as Africans, and the UN system is ready to support, to understand that the only way to deliver durable peace is by delivering sustainable development. So we need to understand that the root source of this instability, or the root cause of this increasing instability in Africa, is because we face a huge deficit of social services, public goods. And we need to be in a position to support African states to be close to their people, as you mentioned, Mr. President. I take the opportunity also to bring an issue that is related to energy, food systems. And the Vice President has just named the impacts of the Ukrainian war on Africa. As you know, there are some global value chains that have been disrupted. Fertilizers, cereals, and Africa is paying a huge bill. I do believe that it's time also to address the food systems paradox. Africa has 60% of the global arable superficie. 60%. In 2050, the world will be in a position to feed more 2.5 billion people. In order for the planet, in order for our planet to feed an additional of 2.5 billion people, Africa needs to be part of the equation. Because we have the land, we have the water, we have the young workforce, and we have a growing middle class. We have all the ingredients to lead this process. So food systems, at the end of the day, is another paradox that needs to be broken in the next years. So this is the reason I'm here, Mr. President, to establish a collaborative partnership with the Pan-African Parliament and to amplify these African narratives. Let's talk about Africa, but above all, from Africa. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Now, before the question and the answer, the media, I just want also to reinforce some messages. First of all, I was asking our very senior person who used to be clerk of this parliament, also Mr. Midrand. He has confirmed that he doesn't remember just as much. I don't also remember a person of this high level from the UN, special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, who is responsible for Africa. I don't remember such a guest at PAP, no. So we take this visit seriously, and that she is coming with a spirit of mutual support. We support them, they support us. We support them as Pan-African Parliament. This again is new. This new chapter between Pan-African Parliament and the United Nations system, I think, will create good benefits for our citizens. And they also want us to support them very much. This is a new narrative. But before you all came, as the media, she made a very important statement, which when she repeated, of course, there's too much on the table. She said when she joined the UN system, and in this position, she found that most reports on Africa in the UN are wrong. That's what she said. And I'm quoting it. I'm using the word wrong, which she also used. She said the reports are wrong. The narratives about Africa at the UN are wrong. And she's here now to ensure that we now project a proper perspective and understanding of the correct, true, and fair view of Africa itself. She did mention also earlier that, as he said, less than, so Africa loses $300 billion dollars, sorry, US dollars per year. But after losing 300 billion, Africa, that's on the right, she said that the right hand. The right hand loses 300 billion. 300 billion a year. On the left hand, it goes begging for debt. Debt relief. Debt is lost. So that's a very instructive statement. The other thing that maybe we want to reinforce, and maybe I'll even ask her to repeat that statement, because she spoke with a lot of passion and energy, that we can talk of financing and getting 300 million, this amount from foreign direct investment. The ultimate solution to Africa's problems is domestic financial mobilization. And I will ask her to get back to that point, what she means, because she is an expert in that area. But we as Pan-African Parliament are saying the Parliament is the voice of the people on this continent. It's the platform for all the citizens across the continent. And as you have seen in the debates on climate change, on issues of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, including whether it's gender, whether it's education, I think as the media, something to pick up which is unique to Pan-African Parliament on this continent, whether we talk of all organs of the Union, is that we are the only organ that has representatives of the people, elected by the people, from all the countries on the continent. And if you look at the delegations, or the composition of the 5 MPs, in each delegation you'll find 1 or 2 out of 5, or 3 out of 5, come from very marginalized areas, or they represent the poorest of the poor on the continent. Very marginal areas. We have them in this parliament. So if you want to get the truth about what is happening in the remotest of Eswatini, the remotest of Zimbabwe, the remotest of Ghana, Ethiopia, Gabon, Mauritania, we have them in this parliament. So the views of the people from the most marginalized areas are expressed at Pan-African Parliament. So bring any topic, bring any subject about Africa, about climate change, about food security, about why you have coups on this continent, why we have problems in Sudan. Unfortunately, we don't have the MPs from Sudan. You will get the truth coming out of Pan-African Parliament. So the UN, by interacting with Pan-African Parliament, it means it becomes a better informed UN. It is not getting information from workshops somewhere in a 5-star hotel. And the people who are reporting or saying things which have been reported to them, and the reporter was reported to them. So there are 5 levels or 10 levels of reported, and then you come and develop some documents about this is the situation. Here we are talking of the grassroots messages coming direct to the UN system, which I think has been the missing dimension in the UN system, that it has relied on elitist reports and not reports from the real poor, from the marginal areas. But I want you to talk about domestic financial mobilization, which you did express with passion earlier on.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we speak in this room, I don't know if everybody knows that Africa, as I mentioned, already finances its own development. We might be convinced that we are financed by external sources. No. We already finance our own development. But unfortunately, our mindset doesn't reflect this reality. Our mindset is convinced that our continent is financed by ODA flows, by external flows. And what is the real consequence of this, Mr. President? By having this mindset does not reflect the reality. We don't preserve our policy space. So when I mention the need to build strong domestic resource mobilization at the country level, not only to prevent the $300 billion leaving the continent, but starting controlling our economic and financial flows. Strong domestic resource mobilizations will put each African country in a position to control its own economic and financial flows, instead, in a medium, long term, begging for debt reliefs and debt suspensions. So there is a dimension, there is a paradigm in the financing for development that needs to be changed. And the paradigm is to transform domestic resource mobilization as the epicenter of financing for development in Africa. Because if a country succeeds in building a strong domestic resource mobilization system, gaining policy space, start deciding the best way to finance its own deficit, that same country, Mr. President, will be in a position to change the risk profile of that country. And when you change the risk profile of that country, meaning that you can access international capital markets in a much stronger bargaining position. And this is crucial, because these, at the end of the day, influence the correlations of forces. So DRM, or domestic resource mobilization, has become a critical piece in delivering development in the next 20, 25 years. A critical piece. If we get it right, we might accelerate the implementation of our Agenda 2063 and the SDGs. Has become a key success factor. Thank you, Mr. President.